Now's a good time to thank our sponsor, Survivors for Solutions. There's a lot of great things about this relationship. Like us, Survivors for Solutions wants to see continued innovation in the pharmaceutical space. They embrace the free market and believe that the free market is the best solution to improve patient lives. It was founded by our close friend CZ, or John Swartacki. CZ founded the group when he saw the damage that the Inflation Reduction Act was going to bring to the pharmaceutical ecosystem. He's been a patient, and Eric, I think you'll talk about that in a minute, but he's been a patient for several decades himself, and he wants solutions not just for himself, but for his family and friends and for Americans in the future. And he knows how important it is for continued pharmaceutical innovation to happen here in the United States, because if it doesn't, it won't happen anywhere.
Joe, you're right. CZ is a longtime friend of both of ours and a seasoned Washington pro. But what most people don't know is that John Swartacki has also suffered from multiple sclerosis for over 30 years. He was diagnosed and has required 4 different breakthrough drugs over the course of this disease in order to just live. All these drugs have been developed in a robust ecosystem of medical discovery and delivery, an ecosystem that the Inflation Reduction Act and President Biden now threaten. That threatens the hope and security and safety, the liberty, and ultimately the lives of millions of Americans suffering from chronic, debilitating, or life-threatening disease. He formed Survivors for Solutions to help save this system so others like himself have the chance at a fulfilling and robust life. You can learn more about CZ and his lifelong struggle with multiple sclerosis from our March 27th DC EKG interview, plus his website, survivorsforsolutions.org, or on Twitter @HopeMattersMost. Joe, we're really fortunate. CZ is our leader here at DC EKG, and we look forward to advocating on his behalf and the behalf of millions of American patients in the years to come on our show.
Welcome back to DC EKG with Eric Euland and myself, Joe Grogan. We're joined by David Senior, and we're continuing the discussion about drug shortages. David, you spoke before we broke about the necessity of getting more manufacturing here in the United States and creating some advanced manufacturing. Can you talk about that a little bit? What do you mean by advanced manufacturing, and what do you think might be necessary to have more manufacturing of pharmaceutical products and finished pharmaceutical products here in the United States?
Thanks, Joe. Pleasure to answer these questions as best I can. Again, not being a scientist, but when we talk about advanced manufacturing, we're talking about manufacturing that typically uses continuous flow as opposed to batch manufacturing. So it's done in, it's a very different way, in a different footprint, different technology that's continuously measuring, the output, the quality of the output. And the theory is that this new footprint of technology that typically generates a higher yield of product. So you start with your ingredients that go into the manufacturing process. Typically, continuous flow manufacturing generates a higher yield. So there's more that can be produced with the same base ingredients. And there's great optimism and promise that this is a way that the U.S. can compete with Asia in terms of the manufacturing process. The truth is that manufacturing labor costs in Asia are, in India and China, are a fraction of the U.S. And so it really would take technology to compete head to head in terms of the cost position, or that's the theory behind it. But this takes investment. And I think that when we think about the role of bringing manufacturing back to the U.S., there has to be some level of cost competitiveness. And the question is, does it have to meet it dollar for dollar? And what we hear from manufacturers is, look, we want to be cost competitive, but when we think about cost competitive, is that every single day, or is that across a period of time with the reliability of supply that U.S. manufacturer could generate? So yes, you might be able to buy that product somewhere else, 95 days out of 100 at a lower cost, but when product goes into shortage, you're effectively paying for that. And so can we come up with a different structure? And we're involved as a distributor. We're involved in a number of discussions with manufacturers about not just their role in terms of manufacturing, but how could we be a commercial partner to help bring that product to market? Because we focus on price when we're making our sourcing decisions, but we focus a lot on reliability. And this is a key aspect to reliability for us.
So how do you measure reliability? How do you assess reliability? How does the company evaluate that when it's making decisions? Is there a set of objective metrics? Do you have internal rubrics? How does that all work?
Well, without getting into the specifics, I mean, it ties to do we get product? Do we sign a contract with the manufacturer, and are we confident that we will get product? So it's one thing for a manufacturer to offer a price to us, but are we confident that next day, next week, every day they will have product available to us? And to the extent that there are any hiccups or issues, they work closely with us, smooth those out, and ensure that we know what's happening. And so we've got complete visibility, to the extent that we have to rely on a secondary supplier, we've got, information. But generally speaking, Eric, it's about reliability. It's about the fact that we have access to product. We're not playing a role of, and there's a lot of conversation in the industry about quality scores. And we certainly look at the the output of FDA reports, 483s and whatnot, but ultimately it comes down to, are we confident that manufacturer can meet our customers' needs?
David, you've been involved in conversations on the Hill going back many years. Post-COVID or during COVID, there was a ton of attention on the Hill because of shortages of everything from masks to worries about the components that go into vaccines. But then, as usual in the United States, after a crisis of some sort, whether it's 9/11 or whatever, it goes back to business as usual. What's the tempo of conversations, without getting into specifics, or how optimistic are you that policymakers, whether they're in the Biden administration or on the Hill, may see an opportunity to move in a direction to address shortages? Or do you think it's going to be a little bit of time? Do you think that there are serious people working on the issue and something might happen in the next few years?
Joe, we are optimistic, and to your point, we've been working on this and thinking about this for a long time. I would tell you that I'll just tell a little story. In 2019, I was focused on quality, shortages, price volatility, both up and down, and I was doing a presentation to a group from Department of Defense about economics in the channel. And I get to the end of the presentation, and they said, "That was all interesting, Mr. Senior, but if this trade war with China, expands and exports, imports are shut down, what would happen?" And I had no answer to that question. And that really turned me on to the fact that the fourth pillar of the issue here is national security. And I think that to the extent that that's recognized as a key here, that accelerates things. What I tell you, Joe, is that during COVID, I think the issue about drug shortages from the standpoint of how the market functions and the pressure on the industry got mixed together with what was happening with pandemic. And we were trying to talk about some of these solutions and that we've been talking about with policymakers, but the idea of combining demand-driven shortages and supply-driven shortages together, we see it playing out in Congress as a complicated thing. And, some people want to separate those two into two buckets. Others want to combine them. What I'd say is I would hope that the solutions for shortages also do play a role in demand-driven emergencies. What I'd say is that, Joe, I think people have been really confused over the last few years about this. And, there was so much focus during the pandemic on demand shortages that I think this got left behind. And, some of the things that people were thinking about, seminal report out of FDA in 2019 on shortages. I think people are coming back actually to this issue about supply-driven shortages, which, aren't as dramatic, but are, if you add them all together, they are a massive issue, and I think policymakers are understanding that. So, I'm probably the most optimistic I've been in years. And to your point, I've spent a lot of time, talking to people on Capitol Hill and in the agencies about these topics, and I see a level of focus on this that I have not seen in several years.
Well, that's interesting to hear, and usually most people watching Congress wondering whether or not they can produce anything are pretty pessimistic. So it's fun to hear optimism. In addition to increasing the level of policy sophistication as you kind of look at these two challenges and ways to handle them, are there other aspects of what might be smart public policy to onshore and then deal with these? By that, I'm meaning on the tax side, on the regulatory side, other pieces of statute on the federal level, as well as partnerships with states. How do you go about thinking of this, or should you go about thinking of this, I guess a better way of saying it, only in, look, this is this problem that we should solve with these tools, or there are other tools we can bring to bear here?
Well, I think there are a gamut of tax incentives that manufacturers are looking for to stand up new capacity in the U.S. We're a member of a coalition called the SAMS Coalition, Safety and American Medical Supply, and we believe that these incentives can play a role in again diversifying where the supply chain starts, not bringing all manufacturing back to the U.S. I think that's unrealistic for many reasons. But if we had a more sound balance, in particular as it comes to the essential medicines, which oftentimes are injectable products, but not exclusively injectable products. So I think tax incentives for standing up manufacturing could be a piece of this, for the R&D, for standing up facilities. The other thing that people are trying to figure out is on the reimbursement side. So to the extent that pharmacies, providers are paid more for using certain products, how does that translate into those, let's call it American-made products, onshore or nearshore products? And you'd have to tie additional reimbursement to those products, and nobody's cracked the code on that, but it's an intriguing idea that that whether it's not just the government, but the pharmacy community would not just be paying more, but be reimbursed more for those products that are getting support from the government.
You mentioned drug pricing in this here, and we're not going to be able to get through all of this before we break, but let's talk a little bit about the Inflation Reduction Act, which passed Congress recently in an effort to bring prices down. Now, I don't want to put you in a difficult spot, but I'm interested in how you're thinking about these sort of pricing cliffs that the government is going to impose at 9 years for small molecule drugs, a little bit over 12 years for the biologics drugs. There's been some chatter in the ether that shortages are already occurring because of that. I'm interested in your opinion about that, number one. And two, a number of companies have announced that they're killing specific therapeutic programs because of the Inflation Reduction Act. You don't have to give us an opinion about the merits of any the wisdom of the lawsuit, but I'm interested of the lawsuits or the legislation. But I'm interested in your experience in watching this. How do you see this playing out and this massive change? Have you cracked the code yet, or is it still something you're trying to evaluate?
Joe, yeah, thanks for not putting me too much on the spot with
Just
trying to
enough.
opine on things that are could get me into trouble. But yes, I mean, I think we do see manufacturers, they're oftentimes they're announcing cutbacks in their research and development. I mean, they're saying it to Wall Street, and they can't say that to Wall Street unless it's true. So it stands to reason that there are going to be tougher decisions around R&D, and whether it's new products coming to market or things other places where manufacturers may be doing investments, additional indications, research on earlier treatment lines, additional diseases, whatnot. So it's not just new products, but it's existing products, and how do you ensure that they're maximized? And so we're going to see this play out over time. It is, from where we stand, it is going to be a substantial change to the market. And, as it pertains to, the only thing I'd say about the research and development and, what's going to take place is, we'll never know. We'll never know if one product or 135 products don't get invented because of, the Inflation Reduction Act. And we won't know if it's a blockbuster, the next Katrina, or, another Me Too that doesn't get created. So, I think all the academic research should try to figure out, how it's going to impact. You don't know, and I sort of respect the analyses on both sides. It's one product or 135, but we sort of will never know. But it's pretty clear that R&D is being impacted, and I think from the standpoint of how this plays out. I mean, CMS is issuing guidance. They came out with preliminary guidance a few months ago. They came out with additional guidance at the end of June in terms of how they're thinking through this. And it's interesting watching the evolution. This is so complicated in terms of, I mean, from your time in government that, what about this? What about that? All of the details that have to be thought through. And, what we think, the way I always think about this is not to say this was inevitable, that Inflation Reduction Act was coming, but we've sort of been bracing for it since Medicare Part D was passed. And, it was sort of one of the things that was out there. Now it's out there. And, it's a thing that, we know is a certainty. There are so many uncertainties around what's going to happen with respect to, new R&D, how the channel responds and reacts to this. We are expecting some significant changes to, sort of the R&D, how new products are priced. And there are so many different aspects to the law that, we're trying to, digest what's going to happen. And, I find myself, playing, the economist, which is, well, it could be this, or it could be the opposite of this. In terms of the outcome. And the example I'd give is the inflation penalties. It's so interesting, and this might be a little bit off topic to your question, but in other parts of healthcare where the government is the payer, and the government is one of the things that back to my point about Part D is. I started my career not in pharmaceuticals. I started in provider services, and was very used to the idea that the government, effectively set price for what they were willing to pay when they're the buyer. And what we see in those situations is typically that if the government is constraining reimbursement, so call it hospital reimbursement, DRG rates going up 1% per year, what happens? Well, list price goes up faster, and the commercial market pays more and more. And so, there would have been a theory that that's what's going to happen here. That list price is going to actually accelerate faster, commercial market's going to pay more, and that could happen. I'd say the thing that's going to constrain that is the inflation penalties. So the inflation penalties around drug companies raising price faster than inflation. And, this on top of the inflation penalties that now are, sort of accelerating in the Medicaid space as well. And so, we're dealing with a new environment in terms of pricing. And, in the last 30 years, with CPI being between, call it 1.5% and 3%, pretty steady through those years, there's been no correlation between CPI and drug prices, drug price increases. And now all of a sudden, it's going to be very interesting to see if these penalties stack up in a way that bring more correlation between those two. I've swung more in that direction from sort of my history of the government is subsidized by the commercial market, but we don't know where it's going to head.
Great point. And with that, David, I think this was a rich topic of conversation. Let's hold, and we'll be back for our next segment. This is DC EKG with Eric Hewland and host Joe Grogan.